All right, let's jump right in. Today, we are tackling one of the most talked about and honestly, one of the most controversial geopolitical moves of 2025, UN Security Council Resolution 2803. Now, on the surface, it's a plan for peace in Gaza, but it has split the world right down the middle. So, is it a genuine, necessary step towards stability, or is it something else entirely?
This quote gets right to the heart of the whole controversy. Because look, while everyone says they want peace, and who doesn't, the real fight over this resolution isn't really about peace. It's about something much deeper: power, consent, and ultimately, who gets to decide what the future looks like.
Okay, so what does this plan actually propose? What's on the table? At its core, the whole resolution is trying to answer that massive question: what comes next for Gaza? But the answer it provides, well, it's led to two completely different, totally opposing interpretations of what it's really all about. So on paper, here's the deal. The resolution creates two brand new entities: a board of peace, which is supposed to handle the governance side of things, and an international stabilization force for security. Now, the stated goal here is pretty clear: provide external oversight, stop the violence. But, and this is a huge but, the key detail is how it was created. It was drafted and approved entirely by foreign actors, by outside powers. And this is where you really see those two different interpretations clashing. On one side, you've got the proponents, the realists. They look at the situation and see a region teetering on the brink. They're worried a power vacuum could just ignite a much wider, more devastating conflict. So for them, yeah, external oversight isn't perfect, but it might be the only thing stopping a total collapse. It's about stabilization, whatever the cost. But then, the critics see something completely different. They call it control without consent. They see a power structure being forced on a people from the outside, one that completely ignores the right of Palestinians to decide their own future for themselves. Now, this criticism, this idea of control without consent, it's not just coming out of nowhere. For a lot of people who are watching this unfold, the logic behind Resolution 2083 feels, well, uncomfortably familiar, like an echo from a very controversial chapter of history. Yeah, the specific term that keeps coming up is trusteeship. If you look back in history, this was basically a system where a powerful country would take over administration of a territory that it decided wasn't ready to govern itself. And while the language used was always about guidance and support and help, let's be real, it was fundamentally a tool of colonial control. And that's the direct line critics are drawing from that history, right to this resolution today. And this really breaks down that argument, right? Critics are saying we are seeing a classic three-step playbook unfold. Step one, you define a population, whether you say it out loud or not, as being incapable of governing themselves. Step two, you install external guardians to run things for them. In this case, that's the Board of Peace and the Stabilization Force. And step three, you wrap the whole thing in the language of peace, stability, and humanitarianism to justify it. So the crucial point here isn't just about the nuts and bolts of the plan. It's about the entire dynamic it creates. It sets up this relationship of, supervisor and supervised, almost like an adult and a child. And what critics are saying is that the moment you take consent out of the equation, support just becomes another word for control. You end up treating people like they're just passive objects to be helped, instead of active partners in building their own future. Of course, a decision like this never happens in a vacuum, right? To really get what's going on, we have to zoom out. We need to look at the whole complex web of global interests and international players. Because trust me, this resolution is about a lot more than just Gaza. Okay, just look at this web of competing interests. You've got the United States playing a huge role in shaping the peace framework. But critics are quick to point out, can you really be a neutral referee when you're also one of the main players? Then you have the Israeli prime minister outright rejecting a two-state solution, which pretty much torpedoes the plan's own stated political goals. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is sitting there saying their huge normalization deal is contingent on that very path to a two-state solution. So, total deadlock. And to top it off, you have Germany talking about peace while at the same time resuming arms exports to Israel. Critics say that move speaks louder than words about what's really driving the decisions. And believe it or not, it gets even messier. For starters, the appointment of Tony Blair to the peace team, well, for critics, that created an immediate trust deficit, just given his controversial history in the region. Then you've got Russia and China. Now, they didn't veto the resolution, but they didn't vote for it either. They abstained. And that's widely seen not as an endorsement, but as a huge signal that they just don't believe this plan can work. And maybe most importantly, key regional powers, we're talking Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, countries with deep ties and influence, were apparently left out of the room when this was being drafted. It really makes you wonder, can you really outsource the geography of peace? So all of this high-level political maneuvering, it's not just a game. It has real, tangible consequences. So let's bring our focus back down to the ground, to the human side of this, and to the really big question of the plan's legitimacy. Okay, and this is a really critical piece of the puzzle. The day after the resolution was passed, something called a unified interpretation was issued. Now, this wasn't a new vote or an amendment, but it might as well have been. It's what gave the resolution real teeth. It made the roadmap legally binding, and it officially empowered the stabilization force to oversee demilitarization. So, just like that, what was kind of ambiguous suddenly became very, very authoritative. And that brings us to this number. A number that, for critics, says everything you need to know. 0. That is the number of Palestinian representatives who were at the table when this plan for their future was drafted and approved. Not 1. And that single fact, right there, is the entire foundation of the critique. The idea that you simply cannot impose legitimacy from the outside, from the top down. So at the end of the day, you're left with these two clashing worldviews. The realist looks at this and sees a necessary strategy. Yeah, it's imperfect, but it's a way to force stability onto a truly desperate situation. But the critic looks at the very same plan and sees a profound injustice, a familiar historical pattern just repeating itself with a new name. And caught right in the middle of this huge geopolitical debate, the people of Gaza, who have to live with the consequences no matter which side you're on. And so that leaves us with one final big question. It's the question that really hangs over this entire resolution. When a plan for a people is made completely without them, who is it truly for? That's definitely something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.